Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Osler. This episode will focus on North Star. It's being recorded in May and released in May of 2021 with the goal to connect more of you to the upcoming North Star conference in June. And we'll have links to North Star registration in the podcast description. But who better to talk about North Star than its co-founders, Ty Mansfield and Jeff Bennion. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Richard. We're really honored to be here.
Yeah, happy to be here.
And this will be kind of I think the order will be is Ty and Jeff will introduce themselves, their stories, if you're not familiar with them. Then we want to introduce North Star to you, our listeners. Some of you may be very familiar with North Star and planning and attending. Some of you may just want to learn more about North Star, and I'm honored to have these two good men on the podcast to explain North Star, its mission, its focus, the type of people, the groups that they're inviting to come to their conference. I've been to their conference several times. I felt a wonderful spirit there. One of the greatest spiritual experiences I've had are in some of these breakout sessions as LGBTQ Latter-day Saints share their story. And grateful for the work that they're doing. If I do a good job, listeners, I will not talk very much and let these two good men share. So let's start. Who wants to go first and introduce their story?
Why don't you go, Ty?
All right, I'll go first. So I'll give you just the brief digest version. So I grew up in Utah, attended BYU. I think I had some awareness, but was pretty in denial about sexuality until probably 2 years after my mission. And so I was at BYU, I was teaching at MTC, working in the temple, doing all the things that I thought I should be doing to overcome this spiritual problem. And that was kind of the paradigm that I was operating in at the time, and that's how it was supposed to be. But feelings were getting stronger rather than weaker. And so I had a bit of an existential crisis at one point. It wasn't so much a faith crisis as it was an existential crisis. I just couldn't see my future, the future that I was planned for myself, all of a sudden became, I couldn't see it. And that scared me. And so that was when I finally started to reach out to first a bishop. He recommended a counselor at BYU, saw the counselor for about 2 years, and then just slowly, eventually started trying to reach out to other people. I had never met anybody else, had never shared my story with anybody else. So short story long, that began a journey of just getting to know other people and trying to figure out what my future would look like. And my plan at the time was, with a few sessions of therapy, I could kind of kick this and then get married to a woman and have kids like I'd always planned. And that wasn't happening. And so that was discouraging. At one point, questioned my place in the church for about a year, explored dating men, had some very strong spiritual experiences at the end of that year that led me to recommit to the church, but I did not believe I would ever get married. So at that time, my commitment was, I'm doing this to kind of explore how do I live out a faith-filled life, not getting married and not having kids. I just couldn't see that at that time. So that was my journey for about 7 years. Somewhere in that point, my undergrad was actually Chinese studies and business. And so I was going to work for the State Department. But as I moved to DC, had some impressions that led me to move into therapy. So I went back to school in marriage and family therapy.
Wow.
Got my master's, got my doctorate.
Tell our listeners what your doctorate's in.
My doctorate is in marriage and family therapy, and my dissertation was on, the topic was on how couples where one partner experiences gender dysphoria or identifies as transgender, who are Latter-day Saints, how they navigate that within their marriage and negotiate that within their marriage.
That's great. What year was that?
I started my dissertation a year pre-Caitlyn Jenner.
Wow.
So, and the world changed.
This is, since then a lot's been done, but it's just interesting you took on that topic back then.
Well, how did you tell them how you chose that topic? That was a spiritual process too.
Yeah, no, I felt very prompted. So my original that was my second start at dissertation. My original dissertation was to look at mindfulness-based interventions in couples therapy, right? And so mindfulness is kind of another love, but that's a whole other talk. So that's where I started, but I can't.
Ty's written a book about that too with some other people.
Yeah. So
The power of stillness.
Yeah. So I had an impression that I needed to look at, transgenderism, look at couples dynamics, but I'd already invested a year into this other, dissertation topic. And so I think I resisted that for about a year and then finally just started over. And so finally finished my dissertation, and that overlapped with a lot of the ministry work that we were doing with North Star. And so it helped inform what we were trying to offer, and what we're still this is still an evolving, because again, the conversation around transgenderism, pre-Caitlyn Jenner and post-Caitlyn Jenner, is pretty dramatic. The world has changed in dramatic ways since it was a really palpable shift in the culture that happened at that time. So that was my dissertation topic. Finished my doctorate. At some point, just as I was starting my doctorate, I met my wife, Danielle. And so that was about 7 years after that kind of recommitment to the church. Everything felt right and felt good and beautiful. And it was very easy in a way that it had never been before. And so we now have 5 kids, and we live in Spanish Fork, Utah. And so
5 kids.
We have 5 kids.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm. We have a 10,
They're all adorable.
a 9, an 8-year-old who just got baptized, a 6, a 4, and a 2-year-old. So
Tell our listeners the books you've written.
So the first book that I ever wrote was actually not too long after I had recommitted to the church. I had written an essay about this journey of faith that I was on, kind of in recommitting and what that meant to me. And that got into the hands of somebody. I'd actually shared it because part of my journey of healing was meeting Fred and Marilyn Mattis. So their son had committed suicide in Los Altos, California during the Night Initiative in 2000. It was very public. It was a Newsweek cover story. I mean, it made a lot of national news. Elder Holland was there at the time, very impacted by that. And so I wanted to meet them because I knew that they had some interaction with general authorities. And at that time, there weren't the resources. The only resource I was aware of at the time was this 1995 article that Elder Oakes had written. And I loved Elder Holland. And I wanted to I thought the closest that I was going to get to Elder Holland was the Mattises. So I tried, I met them. They shared their story. They were very loving. And that's part of what was very healing for me, because I was in a place where I still felt a lot of shame. Not very many people knew this about me. And when I showed up at their house, all they knew about me was my name. And they just said, "Come here, give us a hug." Right? I mean, it was just this very loving. And I just couldn't understand how people would do that to people like me. Like, I knew what people felt about people like me. And so that was very healing. Like, I could feel shame melting away. And so I shared that experience in this essay that I had written. I took it to them to have them read the essay.
And this was just for your English class.
It was for an English class.
Yeah.
But it was a writing for publication class. So we had to submit it somewhere. So I thought, I'll submit it to the Ensign, right? But I didn't know I didn't know where it would get published. But I knew that I wanted to make sure I represented their story correctly. And so I took it to them, had them read it, went back the next day to get any feedback that they had. And they had their son-in-law there with them, who was a product director at Deseret Book. And they had already been approached by Sherry Dew to share their story. And they wanted the voice of an individual, and he liked what I said in the essay, asked if I wouldn't mind expanding that a little bit for a book. And that was the beginning of everything that's different. I mean, it was really an inflection point in my life that changed everything.
Very historic, Richard, because Ty was the first person who experienced this, who put his real name on there. There had been other books by Latter-day Saints.
They use pseudonyms?
But they used pseudonyms, or it was name withheld. And we probably don't need to go into it, but there was a whole process about whether he could or should use his name with Deseret Book. But again, Ty, you shared with me at the time how you really felt spiritually like you needed to do that. And that had its upside and downside. Yeah. But a lot of people, could have said you were just some invention. You weren't a real person.
Well, I only agreed to do it with the understanding that I would use a pseudonym. And then as I got closer and closer to publication, I had some very strong spiritual experiences that I needed to use my real name, which was terrifying. And Deseret Book had 2 meetings about that. Just
Again,
about
this
that one
is 2002. So this is
2003.
Okay.
2003, 2004. It came out in 2004. And they were discouraging me. Not because of, I think the thing was protective, right?
Yeah, they were wanting to protect you.
Yeah. But they said, whatever you choose, we'll go with. And so we did that. And that was, that changed my life in pretty remarkable ways.
I would assume that helped melted away the shame. I love that term you used a few minutes ago. And I'd assume that putting your name on there and being authentic and writing this book and really being groundbreaking book in so many levels, including using your name, personally helped you with just melting away the shame. And for many others, that you were brave enough to do this. Yeah. Several people contacted me afterwards saying that they were surprised they thought Ty Mansfield was a pseudonym because they assumed that this person was a pseudonym, right? And then once I got to the end, I talked about why I chose to use my real name, and that was when people knew that that was my real name.
And all those people that reached out to you kind of formed the germ of North Star, Richard, because Ty started a listserv. Some of your listeners know it. It's like an email list. This is before Facebook and all that stuff. So a lot of those people formed the germ of what eventually became North Star. Right. So from there, and part of what was really powerful to me was as I was trying to navigate this journey, and this is really what leads into North Star, it sort of at least kind of seeded the idea. Because as I was looking for resources, I couldn't find anybody who wanted to navigate who seemed to be trying to navigate this within the church, or at least seemed to be doing it well, right? I mean, there was one support group that I attended, but everyone just really seemed they were struggling and they were conflicted, and everybody else was either, I was at BYU at the time, so they were either kind of waiting to get out of BYU so they could start, dating, or they were dating the same sex at BYU. They were kind of on their way out, and they were either starting out now or they were waiting to, leave before they, once they graduated, they were going to be on their way out. So even though it was nice, there was a feeling of liberation and healing in talking to other people who had that shared experience. It still felt kind of lonely because I couldn't find anybody that really seemed to be committed and wanted to do this in the church and seemed healthy. And so, but then after the book came out, so I was kind of I felt like I was doing this on my own and trying to figure this out on my own. But after the book came out, all sorts of people were reaching out to me who had already been there. And I thought, where were you? Like, where were you when I needed you, right? And so part of my thought then was that I wanted to have some kind of a book that was the cloud of witnesses and have a number of people share their stories. So that was the birth of Voices of Hope. Your second book. Mm-hmm. Back to your question of what books he wrote. That term, cloud of witnesses, that's a beautiful term. Is there a scriptural back? Yeah. Paul used that phrase. Paul used that phrase. So great, a cloud of witnesses. Yeah. I knew that was familiar. That's a beautiful reference to Paul. Yeah. And that was my hope, that we could have a cloud of witnesses. I could just find people, at least to provide it as an option, right? Because I get that this can be a really challenging, it's a really sensitive journey. You don't want to should people into a particular path, right? But to at least know that certain pathways are options. Or if they're a viable option, yeah. That was my hope. And so started as I was meeting people and just, finding people who are navigating this well or, really had their heart into it. And some of them identified as gay and some of them didn't. And I had women and men and some spouses. And so brought that together into Voices of Hope. And then that birthed. So that's an anthology. That was an anthology. I just wrote the introduction to that. And then the Voices of Hope project was kind of a website, video, essay expansion of the book. The greater cloud of witnesses. I like that, Jeff. And then that effort as an independent thing kind of merged with North Star and then became an official North Star initiative. So that's one of the things which lives on today. Yeah, which lives on today. Still releasing. Mm-hmm. And then your third book was The Power of Stillness, right? Yeah. So part of my journey was really some insights from kind of intersected with Buddhist thought and mindfulness, initially through mental health. And then I had a couple mentors who were Buddhist psychotherapists and got certified in mindfulness teaching and so me and some colleagues, and that intersects, but it's separate from this journey. It was a very important part of a personal journey, but I also don't always talk about this as part of that. But we wrote a book through Deseret Book last year called The Power of Stillness, Mindful Living for Latter-day Saints. It's great. Can you talk about the book you're working on now? Yeah, probably not too much. I am working on a book with a colleague on the integration of spirituality and sexuality.
That's great.
for Latter-day Saints. But just generally, it's not SSA specific or sexuality minority specific.
Tell our listeners what you do professionally.
So I'm a therapist. I have a full-time private practice in Provo, and then I also teach part-time in religious education and the School of Family Life at BYU.
That's great.
Yeah.
And listeners, as I look back to my journey, this book in particular, In Quiet Desperation, what year was that published?
2004.
I read that book. I have thought about that book many times since I read it, and Stuart Mathis and that story, and it was probably... I think those kind of things really helped me when I had priesthood responsibility for a couple of gay men, that I'd had that sort of locked in the back of my brain, and the nuance and what you taught in that story. And I just felt for this young man and the difficult situation he was in, that he had no control to sort of, it was outside of his control to sort of solve his sexuality and fully participate. You know this.
Right. There was sort of
just a very difficult situation. It sounds like he had wonderful parents that were very aware of how about his difficult situation, did everything they could as parents. And as a young parent, it was very thoughtful and very helpful book. So I'm glad that you wrote that, and it brings honor to the Mathis family.
Yeah.
And listeners, as I told Ty before we went live, I meet with, people I'm not a therapist, but people sometimes come and just tell me their story. And Ty is helping a lot of people in his practice. And there's a lot of other therapists out there that are safe places for LGBTQ Latter-day Saints. And so I'm grateful for the work that Ty and Jeff are doing at North Star, as well as the work that Ty's doing professionally. And just the trailblazer he is within our church on this subject, and he's in the middle of this intersection. So he's, sort of a lightning rod probably at times for
most of the time.
And as an ally, I can sort of step in and out of the space if I want to, but that's not possible for you. And so I hope you feel, just the love and support of people like me and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of others that you're probably not aware of that you've helped.
Thank you.
And on behalf of all of us, we're grateful for you.
Yeah.
And the work you're doing at North Star. So Jeff, and I don't know if you want to say any more about yourself, Ty.
No, we'll say more as we get into introduction of North Star.
Jeff Bennion.
Yeah.
Co-founder of North Star.
Right. Well, I had in many ways a similar experience to Ty, where I didn't see anyone within the church really with this example. And my mission was a time when I really felt spiritually, before then I was in denial, I would say. Well, whatever these feelings are, whatever they are, it can't be that. I can't be gay. It's not that. But on my mission, I was really spiritually led to own up to this as a thing. So I came home from my mission and...
Where did you serve, Jeff?
Belgium, Brussels, French speaking.
Cool.
And I think you'll find a common thread, Richard, at least among the young men you talk to, that's a pretty precarious time for a lot of us coming home from our missions. There's a lot of reasons why. I have theories, but we don't need to go into that. So I started learning and reading, and this was in the early to mid-'90s. So about 10 years before Ty. And I found some online resources, which I was a computer nerd, which kind of helped and hurt in some ways. But this was in the internet days, like before the World Wide Web even. So there were email lists and there were email addresses, but I had to go up to the University of Utah campus to read these emails. This dial-up CompuServe and AOL were just kind of starting. Yeah, remember those?
Gosh,
yeah,
I thought of that word for a decade.
Yeah, I feel old, Richard. You're helping.
I'm older than all of you.
Anyway, so I found some online support, and but still, I was very secretive. I'd find books in the University of Utah Library, and I'd read them behind another book in case I'd find the darkest secret corner in the library, and then put another book around it in case somebody walked by. I didn't dare check them out. There's no way I was going to check those out. Anyway, through a gradual process, I got to know some more people, found some wonderful mentors, wonderful examples. to me through that reaching out, through taking those risks of vulnerability and self-disclosure. But meanwhile, personally, I was, I find that when I got home from my mission, marriage seemed like a possibility to me. And the longer I was home, the further away that seemed possible. I'd had a slight attraction to women, but 9 out of 10 times it would be men I'd notice, and be attracted to. So by far the dominant experience for me was that attraction to the same sex. So, but I dated a little bit women, and just for various reasons didn't ever work out. And so by the time I got to my late 20s, I'd kind of given up on marriage. And yet, I'd also had some really sacred spiritual experiences that I knew that was something the Lord wanted for me. And I don't know if this makes sense to you or your listeners, but I knew it was true, but I didn't always believe it, if that makes sense. Sometimes it seemed like God was playing this cruel joke, this cruel trick that he'd set me up to fail. And he was just out of, I don't know what, like some rat in some laboratory experiment. And so I got pretty estranged and angry, but I tried to maintain my relationship, maintain my scripture study, maintain my activity. But I was also dating men a little bit too. More probably out of default because it just wasn't working with the women. And meanwhile, there were a lot of really wonderful men that I met. I don't have anything bad to say about them.
I have to say one thing, though.
Yeah.
Jeff told me early on that at one point he was so angry that the only scripture he could read without wanting to hurl it across the room was the Book of Lamentations.
That's true.
Yeah. In his angry face.
This is true. But I found some scriptures I could relate to. Because, you'd read all this stuff and I'm like, this is just, and a censor a word there that you can imagine, fill in the blank there. I would want to throw it across the room, but I could relate to stuff in Lamentations. These are the people that felt abandoned by God, But I think that helped me too, to stay connected somehow to God and the scriptures. Anyway, you can read the book or watch the show. I ended up meeting my wife-to-be, and that was a 2.5-year process. Definitely gradual. It wasn't anything I jumped into. It wasn't anything I tell anybody to jump into. As President Hinckley said, this isn't a therapeutic way to cure me, right? In fact, I was worried my wife-to-be thought that. So I dragged her to my therapist at the time and said, can you help me make sure that she gets this?
That's really cool.
So my wife teases me about that still, but I wanted to make sure that she understood this wasn't just a theoretical thing and it wasn't just going away magically because we were getting married. So, and obviously there was some trepidation there, but we also had enough experiences over 2.5 years to know that we had a lot of water under that bridge. And so I felt confident that whatever came our way, we'd deal with it, because we had already dealt with a lot. So that's kind of how we decided to get married. And that was we got married in 2004, the day after July 4th. So my single friends tease me that July 4th, 2004 was my last day of independence. But my wife thinks that's not so funny.
Do you have kids?
We do. We have one child. And that's the interesting and somewhat surprising thing, Richard, is certainly the issues of my sexuality have come up in our marriage, but they have by far not been the dominant thing. There's other things like our infertility issues have actually been more painful and more difficult for us to navigate.
That's really honest.
And, a lot of other things, but that's been in the mix. But if there's any big surprise, that's probably the one, was how, and I don't say it's not an issue, I'm not trying to be Pollyanna, but how other issues, that was the one that was concerning and that we talked about and we tried to plan for and continue, around. But there's actually been these other unexpected things.
Infertility is a big deal.
The words of the philosopher John Lennon, life is what happens when you're making other plans. So that happened to us. So I was living in DC when I met my wife.
Pretty good statement.
Yeah. I was living in DC when I met my wife, and I found Ty on one of these listservs, and I emailed him and said, hey, you and I really think a lot alike about these things. We should talk or maybe get together, but I'm here in DC and you're probably in Utah. I think you are. And so, but maybe when I'm back there, we could get together or something and talk. Well, he emails me back and says, actually, I'm moving out to DC in like 3 weeks or so. It was,
I was just getting back from
yeah,
China.
something like that. So I was one of the first people to meet Ty when he moved to DC, which was really fun. So that's how we got to know each other. And I was just recently married. And so that was probably 4 months before the book came out. At least it was in Galley. Yeah, I think you told me.
I moved there in August and it came out in October.
Yeah. So it was not quite out when I got to know Ty.
What do you do professionally, Jeff?
So I work in real estate and property management. But in 2015, I went back and got a master's degree in marriage and family therapy. Wow. So it's Dr. Ty Mansfield. He's got his PhD. I just have my master's degree. And
that's a big deal.
Yeah.
And to go back to school, what I sense would be a successful career and go do that is a big deal. Mm-hmm. So that's
and I
cool.
Still full-time in real estate and property management, but I have a small marriage and family therapy practice.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And tell us approximately your age, just so our listeners get a feel for how old you are.
I'm 42.
And I'm 51. I've been married since 2004. Your listeners can do the math. I've been married long enough, I can't remember. 16, 17 years, something like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So listeners, this gives you a little bit of feel for Ty and Jeff. And what we want to do now, they eventually, I think, are going to lead to this story where they co-founded North Star. And so we're going to lead in this segment helping people understand North Star's upcoming conference, who they're inviting to attend, its purpose. We also want to dispel myths. When I stepped in this space, I had picked up things about North Star that now I realize were not accurate. And I'm a brand management guy, so I'm always interested in how to create correct communication plans for brands. And you've got a brand there that has, just misinformation about it that's out there. So part of this podcast is just to clarify from the co-founders and people that are always felt that it's best to go to the source if you want to understand a brand, to go to the people responsible for it. In this case, it's like Michael Wilcox used to teach me as an institute student. If you want to know the best about Judaism, go talk to a Jew. Go talk to someone who is the very best Jew you can find, and then learn about Judaism through that person. It's sort of this principle. Let's learn about North Star from the co-founders of North Star versus other voices talking about North Star. Just a personal comment about mixed orientation marriages. I wrote this in the book that the biggest spiritual rebuke I've gotten from this space is my feeling about mixed orientation marriages. And when I started doing a couple podcasts, maybe it was Richard Rojas and his wonderful wife.
Yeah, he's a good friend.
All I knew was just these marriages that kind of blew up and were very public. And I just thought, well, these all blow up. And I just learned by meeting with people in mixed orientation marriage. It's the same principle I just shared about meeting with the best Jew you can find, is I realized that these are authentic, wonderful, healthy, thriving marriages. Yeah. And we shouldn't sit on the sideline and hope that a mixed orientation marriage fails or believe it will fail. We would want every marriage to succeed. And the other thought I have is that sometimes there's this phrase out in society that says, live your truth. And to me, that sort of implies sometimes that if you're gay, you should marry a man, and that's living your truth. But I think living your truth is receiving personal revelation for what's right for you in your life. And all of us supporting everybody as they receive their own personal revelation for what's best for them, and not sort of legislating that for other people. Are you okay with what I said?
Yeah, I think that's really fair. And I appreciate you saying that, right? Because I think, you mentioned lightning rod, right? Because I think one of the things, this space is really fraught because you have sort of a lot of competing ideas, right? And at some point you stop being a person and start being an idea, or you represent something that people hate or something like that, right? And so people don't really speak to you. They speak to what they think you are because,
And it's tricky both sides.
And we've done this. A lot of people do the same thing with the gay community, right? Or the LGBTQ community. So there's a lot of projection of just, we don't really see people, which is one of the things I love about what you're doing. You just listen to stories and you honor people where they are in the space that they are. And that's what we need to do more of, right? You've drawn a lot on President Ballard's statement, right?
Exactly.
Which I think is very powerful. And it fosters a lot of empathy and compassion. And so I think, anyway, I just appreciate you bringing attention to that. There's a lot more we could say about that. But.
And so,
it is tough to navigate because we can turn into these punching bags or these poster children for either side, right?
Yeah,
they're not living their authentic life. It's doomed to fail. You imagine if you've talked to Richard, Ricardo, how he resents that, and we do too. But at the same time, we can also be used, well, Ty did it and Jeff did it. Why can't you do it, right? So it can be used the other side too. And so we just have to be, I say, we have to be open to that being a possibility, but it for some of us, and but it's not necessarily the one that everybody's going to do. Some people aren't going to get married, probably.
Yeah, you just don't want to pressure it.
Yeah.
So we could talk about that for a while.
Yeah, we could. That's a whole other podcast, probably.
One of the most touching podcasts we did was Anne and David Ricky, if I remember David's name. And they're in their 60s, and David's gay and is married to Anne. And
that was recent, right?
It was recent. Yeah. I think he did a Voices of Hope a long time ago or a while ago. But I asked Anne, and I said, would you want Dave to be straight? Are you glad he's gay? And she just said, I'm glad he's gay. I wouldn't change a thing about him. And then she went on to say why. And it was just a deeply spiritual moment. And the shame melting away. If he had any more shame that needed to be melting away, to hear his wife talk about him that way was just a real sacred moment for me and perhaps for other listeners. And it's a beautiful marriage. And I try to say, I don't try to look at the straight spouse or the gay spouse and say, who's more of a hero for making it work. I don't have the right to look at any marriage and decide who's more of a hero. That's just, my job is not to go to that space, listeners. My job is just to support all marriages and hope that they succeed. But talk about just the idea of starting North Star.
So one of the things I've told a number of people is that I've had to become a skilled deconstructionist for the sake of spiritual and emotional survival. And when I entered this space, there was kind of the two dominant ministries were Evergreen and Affirmation. And Affirmation has gone through periods of being more faith-friendly and then more faith-critical.
Yeah.
And that's kind of waxed and waned, it seemed, at different points of history. Evergreen was the one that was, explicitly supportive of the church. And I'm just going to say this is a lot of my perceptions that may not always accurate or reflect Evergreen correctly, fully, but there was a feeling of, like, to me, it was very kind of therapeutic in its orientation. Most of the presenters were therapists, and
it was more of the experts, air quotes, speaking to us as people having this experience rather than sharing of the experience like we've just been talking about here.
Right. So here's
what you should do. Here's how you can do.
Yeah, there were a couple things that really they were organizations with very different organizing principles. So Affirmation was very community oriented. It was like by the people, for the people, right? They were, you had leaders who were gay or lesbian, and then you had, and then in Evergreen you had primarily therapists, right? And so, but then, over here, there was something that seemed very powerful about kind of owning your story and speaking up and, kind of, again, just kind of owning your story to kind of, it's kind of cliche Brene Brown now, but like that, own your story. And then over here, I wanted the faith aspect, but there was this kind of a shame culture. Like the classes were kind of labeled female struggler, male struggler. People would use pseudonyms. And I remember one of the most powerful moments was actually a friend of ours. They'd asked him and his wife to share their story, and they introduced him with a pseudonym. And he got up to the pulpit and he said, that's actually not my name. He said, my name is, and he used his real name. And it was just, I thought, thank you. Like, thank you for just standing up and like sharing who you are. And so, so there were pieces in both, I wanted that sense of authenticity and just showing up and being who you are that I saw in affirmation. There was something that was very attractive about that. But at the time that I was kind of coming to things, they were in a very church critical phase. And it just seemed very kind of political and very antagonistic. And so there were pieces that I was really drawn to and then pieces that I weren't. And then there were pieces over here that I was really drawn to and pieces that I weren't. And so so for me, it was kind of like, what are these pieces that I'm drawn to? Can I kind of, extract those and create something at least for me? And so it was this piece that I was trying to live for me. And so at some point, as I was meeting other people after the book came out, the idea was seeded of having what I thought would have been more of an equivalent to affirmation that was more community-oriented than therapeutic-oriented. And it was more of a by the people, for the people. And so...
Even though you're a therapist now.
Well, even though I'm a therapist now.
He wasn't at the time.
Yeah, I wasn't at the time. That was still when I was going to work for the State Department. So so when we started, I mean, we started in the garage, so to speak, just with a listserv and a website, but just the idea, again, being very community oriented.
We didn't have a conference back then.
We didn't set ourselves up to be antagonistic or competing with Evergreen. We just wanted a space affirmation, but just a space where people to kind of fostered a sense of like living more honestly, kind of showing up, being you, but also like all of you. And for people whose faith is just as important a part of their sense of self and identity as their sexuality might be. And so that was the space. And then, and so we kind of existed alongside Evergreen for about 6 years. So people, there's sort of, historically, a lot of people think that, and sometimes we get this, people will say this to us, that this is Evergreen rebranded. But we were entirely two separate organizations for 6 years.
Listeners, that's something I didn't realize till right now, by the way. I've always picked somewhere up that Evergreen sort of ended and the remnants of Evergreen became North Star, and it was just Evergreen rebranded. So I hope everybody realized what Ty and Jeff just taught here, and so that's a big difference from what I had heard.
Yeah. So the focus was, from the beginning of North Star, we've never taken a stance on therapy. So our kind of stance was like, share your story. Yeah. Like we don't promote therapy. We don't criticize therapy. Like we never came out for reparative therapy. We never came out against it. We just this is about living the gospel.
And you share your experience. You tell us if you found something helpful, whatever that was, share it. But not in a should way. This is what you all have to do. I'm the expert. I'm going to tell you the XYZ program to get cured, air quotes again. But here's what worked for me. Here's what helped me. And I call it the smorgasbord. Some people are allergic, they can't do the gluten, and some people are the vegans, and some people are the paleos. And whatever works, you tell us what that is. And then you can pick what you think is authentic and work for you as you're navigating your faith journey.
But that first person narrative was the focus of North Star. And then there were people that would kind of, dip into both, and they'd go to the Evergreen conference and then they'd participate in North Star. And so again, they weren't designed to be competing, but as North Star grew and as Evergreen kind of slowly waned, at one point, I don't even know how all the conversations happened, but there was a decision that Evergreen was going to, they had just decided that they were going to, like we had kind of created enough space that there wasn't a need for two organizations. And so they, at one point, I don't know whether David had approached us or we had approached David Pruden, who was the executive director at the time.
Because they had some emails and contact lists that we didn't want to just drop. There were people that were helped by that organization and so we did want to have some kind of transition where we could take over, some of those listservs and some of those groups and areas to make sure they continue to get
support,
fellowship and support.
So basically we were trying to figure out what this would even mean, because either they were just going to fade into nothing and this was about the time that Exodus, which was kind of an evangelical ex-gay ministry, they had, kind of closed their doors and it became a big national thing. And so rather than having them just close their doors and kind of contribute to this kind of larger narrative of just, everything's going down, we just basically absorbed them. But at that time, because we absorbed them and we put out a statement just saying what kind of explaining all this, I think this is where a lot of the perception comes, is that we had kind of absorbed that history as well, even though that wasn't our history. And really functionally nothing changed. We just continued to be us and continued to do everything we were doing, but with a few more listservs and like that kind of thing. So there wasn't, again, functionally nothing changed for North Star. And our mission has continued along the same trajectory that we began with.
Except we hope it's broadened as, Ty and I, and there were a few other people at the beginning there.
Mostly men.
But we were all men, but a couple spouses, I think. Like my wife was involved and a couple other spouses. But there were a lot of single men too. But we really were pretty short on the women's experience, which is important and has some similarities and some differences. And
parents' experience.
Parents, family, church leaders, and then later on the transgender and gender dysphoria areas came in.
Introduce your mission state. That's very helpful to hear that history. If this is me back to being a brand guy. If you're introducing Oreo cookies to me, this is not fair to compare North Star and to, so I probably should strike that. But just introduce your mission statement.
I don't have it memorized offhand. Jerry, you looking at it?
Yeah, I'm looking it up for us.
But the idea from the very beginning was that it was explicitly faith-based. The focus was going to be people who wanted to live the gospel of Jesus Christ, or at least we're kind of exploring that. Because as people come in, it's a ministry that tends to draw people who are in that space of intersection, like they're kind of at the crossroads. So people kind of come in for a time, and either they figure out that's what they want to do, and they kind of move in and they do well, and then they kind of move on. Right? Or they decide they want to leave the church and they might kind of, move over to affirmation, which I think tends to be probably a better ministry for people who aren't trying to navigate this within the church. So, and our goal hasn't been to compete with affirmation either, right? It's just, here is a space for people who want to navigate this within the church or want to try to at least keep that as an option. Come. And so we have a range of people who are kind of half in, half out, to people who are very solid, very committed, very healthy.
But they all have that common, they understand where we are, which here's our mission. North Star is a faith-affirming resource for Latter-day Saints addressing sexual orientation and gender identity, and who desire to live in harmony with the teachings of Jesus Christ and the doctrines and values of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. There's a lot of people on different stages of that. So we talk about this a lot as a leadership team. If we can just help people make whatever that next step is closer to the Savior, that's the one that helps. It's the model I think we all have experienced, and as Latter-day Saints, we all believe in, which is we feel some spiritual prompting to do something. And then if we act in accordance with that prompting, we will get closer to God and Christ. And then we will get more promptings. And if we keep doing that, we will be led on the path God wants us to. And it takes faith to take those steps. But wherever we are on that path, or whatever we think we know or believe or don't know, what's important is that next step. What is that step you can take? Wherever you are, what is that step you can take towards Christ?
One of the greatest compliments I think that we've ever received was Virginia Pierce. Was a keynote.
Gordon B. Hinckley's daughter.
Yeah, at one of the conferences. And afterwards, she emailed me. And she's like, that was such a remarkable experience. She said, you could feel people reaching for the Savior.
Yeah.
And that was the thing that was most touching to her. And and it feels Zion. This idea of just come and feel loved and let's create community in this direction of, of coming to Christ, right? That's the heart of who we are. And if people find therapy helpful, awesome. Tell us what was helpful. If people don't find therapy helpful or don't want to go to therapy or felt like therapy was harmful,
Tell us about that,
right? And so the therapeutic aspect is secondary or tertiary, right? It's there as part of people's stories to the degree that it's there as part of people's stories, but it's not a focus of the organization. So when people, Jeff and I were talking about this idea of conversion therapy, like the only conversion that we're interested in is Jesus Christ, right? And we're not a therapeutic organization, and we're certainly not of any sort, right? And what we've done actually is when people ask that question about we have in our kind of our Q&A or frequently asked questions, what is your position on conversion therapy? We've explicitly referenced the Reconciliation and Growth Project statement. We're both a part of that group. That's a kind of a liberal, conservative, affirmative, conservative dialogue group that we've been a part of for a number of years. And but it's basically, the idea is, you have a lot of LGBT affirmative therapists and kind of religious conservative therapists saying, let's get rid of this idea of affirmative therapy or conversion therapy, and let's just talk about good therapy. So for people who are at this intersection of navigating faith and sexual identity conflicts, what does good therapy look like that honors client self-determination and does no harm? So our statement is just a reference to the principles of good therapeutic practice that was put out by the Reconciliation Growth Project.
And it may surprise you that a bunch of LGBTQ affirmative therapists and very conservative religious therapists could come together and build that consensus around what is good therapy for this population.
And we did it. We found remarkable
agreement. Yeah.
So that's a great segment. Talk about those two words you just said for listeners, that self-determination and no harm. Just talk about that, and if you feel that applies as parents are trying to help their LGBTQ kids and priesthood leaders and other people that are not in a therapy role, but in an influencer role, whatever the right word is, with LGBTQ Latter-day Saints.
Yeah. And maybe on this, we may even want to provide a link to that, because we have a summary, a one-page summary statement
of
what constitutes harm.
We'll put a link in.
Because it goes both ways, right? And I think
this is important.
This is where a lot of, well-intended allies actually can do harm.
Good.
Right? When we pressure people. This kind of waiting for people to, this don't pursue a same-sex relationship, you're never going to be happy. We're waiting for you and your mixed orientation relationship to fail. Like there's a lot of pressure and projection and narrative that we put on people. And so the idea of harm is that, at least in a therapeutic context. So in most of the mental health professions, there's a little bit of variation, but most of the mental health professions, the two great ethics, the two kind of mother ethics are client self-determination. Clients get to determine how they want to live their life.
They determine their goals.
And how do you help them do that without harming them? Right. And that's it. There's other ethics too, but everything kind of really seems to be connected to those two things. And so those were the guiding principles of the Reconciliation and Growth Project, right? How do you help people at this intersection explore this, seek a greater level of self-understanding, self-awareness? There are going to be clients who privilege faith identity over sexual identity. And there are going to be people who privilege sexual identity over faith identity. But that's a very personal journey, and how people make meaning and give weight to and that sort of thing. It's not about this sort of simplistic construct of gay to straight, right?
Or the other way. There's one way to be true to yourself, and that is if you're gay, you need to be in gay relationships.
Yeah.
Maybe, but maybe not. And so there's other things in the mix that's where Ty says, where he says the harm can go both ways, right? A therapist could say, like, you could imagine a very conservative religious therapist saying, no, you'll never be happy in a gay relationship. You need to stay in the church. Well, I have a testimony for myself that that's true, but I can't make somebody else do that, right? That's the whole point of this existence, right? Is to figure that out for ourselves. We shall find out for ourselves, But at the same time, we also, both Ty and I run across every day, and of course, this is our space. I'm not saying this is more or less dominant, but this is my world. And Ty's, I think, to a large degree, is we also see harm being done by clinicians who say...
Affirmative therapists
who say, oh, you're in a mixed orientation marriage. That's not going to work. You're only going to be happy. Clearly, all your problems in mental health are because of that. You need to have gay relationships or leave your marriage. Or if you're celibate and single in the church, well, you're not going to be happy that way. So you just need to seek gay relationships. And so maybe this is a good time to talk about your 4 options survey research too. But
I don't know if we want to go there. Okay, you can tell us if we want to go there. But I think the key is that, I've worked with a number of people who have gone to therapists who wanted to navigate this within the church, who had therapists who tried to guide them into same-sex relationships. And that caused distress and suicidality, right? We don't hear those stories as much. They tend to stay pretty silent. So, and I worked with a woman once who avoided therapy for 10 years because she didn't want a therapist telling her how she should live her life and what authenticity looked like for her. So I think parents need to be careful about this. I think, ministries, we try to be very careful that this is an option if people want it. We're not telling people that this is where they should be
or have to do.
Yeah. So that's really where it gets.
This concept of self-determination was really helpful for me when I stepped into space, and it resonated with the doctrine of our church of agency.
Yeah.
And the whole plan of salvation. And even though I invite everybody to follow the teachings of the church, I did that as a bishop, I do that now. At the end of the day, I do let people self-determine what they feel is their best path as an LGBTQ Latter-day Saint, and sort of support them, to sort of walk alongside them as the vocabulary. I'll walk with you as you self-determine the best path forward for you, and I'll just leave any judging to our heavenly parents and our Savior. I guess our Savior is ultimately our judge. Are you okay with that? Is that a good framework, or is...
Yeah, I think
because I assume you have a lot of gay men that you've known over the years, hundreds, I would guess, that are now thousands that are now in same-sex relationships. So help us understand how we should treat those people, and how you treat those people, because you probably have lots of friends that are now in same-sex marriages, and they aren't aligned with North Star's goals, or they aren't aligned with the church's goals, but they're still part of the human family.
Right.
I think, there's a couple different angles on that. Okay. I think one is...
and this is the same for women and same-sex. I don't want to make this too male-focused.
Well, there's sort of... because there's a couple pieces here, and this is where I feel like at a church, at least in the community, we don't see this in the leadership, but we see it in the LDS community, where there's a growing polarization around this issue. You have sort of a liberal, progressive contingent that thinks the church is wrong. This is like blacks in the priesthood. It's eventually going to change. And then you have, a more kind of orthodox kind of a contingent. And that polarization, I think, is getting stronger.
Yeah.
And I think those that believe the church is going to change are getting
louder,
more pronounced, louder. That's not the right word, but it's definitely more present. Right. And you see that kind of tension more. And one thing to just as North Star, as an organization, we begin with the framework that we sustain church leaders without reservation. Right. We sustain the doctrines as they are. We sustain the proclamation on the family. We just want to help people navigate this within the church in the way that is going to be best for them. Right. And they make that choice, but we want to support them in that choice. But I think as this frame that you're talking about, like as allies, as supports, as a community, how do we approach this? And because I've heard a number of people that believe the church is going to change make really strong statements like there is no place in the church for LGBTQ Latter-day Saints, right? And that the doctrine is inherently harmful and these kinds of things. I mean, they're pretty strong statements. And I don't believe that that's true for a second. I do know that people have felt hurt, right? I mean, that certainly exists, and we want to honor those stories and hear that pain. But what you're saying, it's like everybody's on a journey. And I think there are a number of reasons that we might experience this for some that there's purpose and design in all of the experiences that we have. Everything's going to get worked out in the end. And that doesn't mean that the doctrine has to change either, right? I fully believe that everything's going to work out, and that there is. So I'm going to use an example, and I think he would be okay with me saying this. Bennett Borden, who's a former president of North Star, he left the church, so he was.
What a good guy!
He's great. He and Becky are
a lot of fun too.
A lot of fun. I mean, they were both in same-sex relationships for a period of time. He had, I think, been inactive for a while. Came back, went on a mission, married a woman, got divorced, was out of the church with a man, later his husband, for 20 years. And as he looks back, he's like, I experienced a lot of healing in that relationship. And this is a person who believes in the doctrine of the church, who believes in marriage between a man and a woman, who looks back on that part of his life as one of great growth.
And doesn't want it just erased.
It wasn't the great mistake. It was part of his experience, his learning, his growth, right? And he talks about his husband who, where he experienced a lot of healing. And his husband later ended up, after they got divorced, his husband joined the church too, which is an interesting part of the story.
Yeah.
But I think for a lot of people, I mean, we're here to learn by experience, right? And to develop and to grow and to mature into godliness. And all of the things that we experience here in this life are going to help us in some way learn how to love God better and learn how to love each other better. And that's why we're here. And so I think as far as people's journeys taking, different paths or scenic routes or whatever that looks like, we just honor people's paths. I think this is everybody. I begin with the frame that everybody's doing the best they can. It's all going to work out in the end.
A lot of grace
and the doctrine is true, right? I mean, the church is true. That's kind of my frame, and I love people wherever they are. And so I think that where you're coming from, this sort of honoring and listening and hearing whatever their journey is, and just leaving it at that, right? Your frame of listen, learn, and love, I think is really a perfect frame.
If I can plagiarize something else Becky and Bennett say, I think this was Becky, his wife now, but it might have been, it was Becky who said this. She said she'll often have parents. So back to your question, how do we support? She said she'll have parents come and say, well, how should I pray for my child who's experiencing this and trying to figure this out, and especially if they're out of the church. Should I pray for them to be miserable so they have a prodigal son experience and want to come back? Should I pray for them to be happy, even though it doesn't align with how I believe things are, doctrinally? What should I pray for? That's a really poignant question. And Becky said, what you should pray for is for your child or friend or whatever, family member, whoever this is, to have the experiences they need to return to their Heavenly Father.
It's a great answer. Yeah. Thank you for talk about. I just want to keep this podcast going for a couple hours. This is really tender ground, and to have you two in my home, and your long view of this issue and your personal journeys being in this space is very, very helpful for our listeners. Talk about who should come to North Star, the different groups that are invited. Give us an overview of who's invited.
I think one of the things...
Before you do that, just let our listeners know the dates. I don't think we've ever told you the dates, listeners. We just said it's June.
Yes, it is in June. First of all, can I say we want you to register for the conference, but that costs some money. We have a Thursday night social. You have to stay tuned. It's embarrassing that I don't know the location of that, but we have a Thursday night social that anybody's welcome to. You don't have to register. And if you're nervous or a first-time attendee, it's a great way to just kind of get to know us without, you can bring a friend or you can bring somebody else along if you're nervous.
And that's on June 10th. Look, I've actually printed this out.
Yep,
First time session is the Murray City Park Pavilion.
Oh, there you go.
At 5:30 on June 10th. The whole conference is June 10th through June 13th, 2021.
So it starts the evening of the 10th, Thursday, at Murray Park. And then all day Friday, till like about 5:30, and then Saturday morning again. And so who comes? We have different we have, of course, things of general interest. And one thing we always tell people, if you look, and I see you've printed out our tentative program too, but if you see a session that interests you, unless it says closed session, you can come. If there's a session in the transgender track that interests you, even though that may not be your interest or issue, go to it. But we do try to have, so we have 2 keynotes a day on Friday and Saturday each. And those we try to have more general and broad interest. These are our crowd pleasers and things that might interest people. So we've got some fun keynotes. But then in our breakout sessions, we have breakout sessions throughout the day, both those days. And we have 6 different breakout sessions. And I always tell our conference planners, my big complaint is there's too many interesting sessions every hour and they need to make fewer interests. So I'm not so torn about where to go. That's another fun thing, by the way, Richard, about being a co-founder of North Star, is seeing how this isn't our organization anymore. There's so many people that have come into this.
That's a credit to both of you.
Yes, but there's so many people, Richard, have put their heart and soul into this. In many ways, I'm humble. I think there's people who put more than I have into this. And so it's wonderful what people have made this. But so we have sessions for spouses who might be married to someone who's navigating this issue around sexuality and gender. We have sessions for church leaders. In fact, Saturday morning, if there's any church leaders listening, our Saturday morning sessions are free. And I should also mention, we're doing a hybrid this year, in person and virtual. So you can register for the conference, and at least most of our sessions are going to be live streamed. We've always had it available for download after the audio, but this year we're experimenting and we're taking a big risk because it's a huge expense. So anybody wants to donate to us, I'll put a plug in there too. It's a huge expense, but we're making the commitment, we're taking the risk. So people around the world can listen in on these and watch as it unfolds in real time. So church leaders, even if you're not here and can't come in person, you can sign up for free for the Saturday morning leadership sessions. So we have sessions for women and for men, for married men, for single men. It's just a wonderful variety of things. And as you mentioned, Richard, there's such a spirit and a power there every year. It's amazing.
Yeah, the vulnerability and the honesty and the community, it just brings a spirit. I sometimes yearn for that in my own congregations as we get sort
and
of
once we get there as congregations, we won't need North Star anymore. I firmly believe we'll get there.
I love that.
Yeah.
And learn to have these vulnerable, honest, safe discussions in our congregations in appropriate times.
Yeah.
Because it breeds a spirit. It brings, I love Spencer Thompson's talk about the Savior and the Savior's wanting to take our burdens, just waiting to do that. It's, I've listened to that a couple of times. It applies to every person on the earth. Even though he's sharing it as a North Star. I think he's the North Star president.
He is our current president. Yeah,
and I think it was his keynote last year or the year before. What about youth? If I'm a youth, I don't know what the youth age group is. If I'm a parent of a youth, talk about youth and North Star.
We have a youth track. That's been a more recent thing, maybe the last 3 or 4.
Yeah, 4 years we have.
So Becky McIntosh.
I would say 14 to 18 would be a good age to come. Yeah. And that's for, again, sexuality or gender issues. They come to all the keynotes, but then they have separate breakouts that are, so they're kind of everything else is separate. They have their own.
So this breakout session doesn't even show the youth.
That's right.
So the youth track is its own thing. They're together all day.
Becky McIntosh, that's a great idea.
Becky McIntosh.
She has a team.
She has a team who's kind of led that.
Very dedicated.
So it's a little trickier with the youth track because what happens there, with adults, it's like, this is what I want. And so I'm kind of seeking out these resources.
On my own volition.
Of my own volition. With youth, it's a lot of parents, this is what we want you to do, and so we're going to try to guide you this way. And so it ends up being a little bit more challenging with youth because a lot of them don't want. I mean, it's hard because with youth who want to stay in the church, they're typically not addressing these issues that early.
No, they come out later.
They'll usually come out after their missions or like early 20s. And so the people who are coming out pretty young, the younger people come out, the more likely they are to leave the church. So it's a little tricky trying to kind of hold space for them in a faith-affirming organization that isn't not trying to coerce them in any particular way. But Becky's just open and loving. And
she's the perfect person to do that.
So there is a track, but
is it true that the younger people, they're more likely, if they come out younger, they're more likely to leave the church?
So I don't know. The culture around this has been changing so dramatically. There's
some research on this, but it's a little dated, so it may not be true.
More are clearly coming out. We'll all agree that more are coming out, and it seems like they're just able to accept as part of themselves earlier that heavenly parents have this is something heavenly parents aren't embarrassed about, or they should, it's how they're created. So they seem to be able to come out earlier and have a better relationship. And I've seen more. I don't know. I don't know the data either.
So at one point, and this is, as you were saying, this is sort of dated research, the earlier people identified as gay, and the earlier they identified as gay and the earlier they came out, the more likely they were to leave the church. But the culture around this has changed so dramatically.
It's probably 15, 20 years old, that data. So we don't know if it's...
What tends to happen, and this is just my observation,
because
I don't think
good observation.
Yeah, but I mean, this is 20 years of observation, but it's anecdotal in the sense that for people who tend to stay, they're staying because they feel a deep spiritual call to stay. And usually the experiences that the spiritual and the seasoning and the deepening experiences that people have, they're happening. These are experiences that they're often having as they get a little older, mission experiences. Most of the people who I know who stay didn't really start opening up about this post-mission. The people who I know, who I've worked with, who open up pre-mission, some of them stay maybe for some period of time, but I just think there is something about, there's less shame.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true. There's less shame now, but there's also often less spiritual rootedness,
mm-hmm.
right? And they're much more kind of, a lot of they're influenced highly by culture and media,
mm-hmm.
and the broader cultural currents.
It's entirely hostile.
Is live your truth, and that means one thing.
Yeah,
there's only one form of truth in that way, and it's kind of, I believe, it's incompatible. The assumptions and beliefs and the worldview around the dominant narrative are actually incompatible with the gospel. So if you've adopted that kind of unthinkingly, you are going to come into this with the idea that I can't be true to myself, and so if people want to look at that or challenge that because of maybe this spiritual rootedness that Ty talks about, then they might question those. But most people just adopt those narratives unquestioningly, and those inevitably, if they're unquestioningly adopted, I think they inevitably lead you away from the doctrines of the gospel.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And I'm glad you're doing youth section, and I'm glad that the youth have a safe place to go.
Yeah.
And one of the work Becky and some of the people that work with her do is, a lot of that is about maintaining the relationship and the connection
with their families.
So you can have some really beautiful moments of connection between parents and children who are kind of pulling against each other and going a different way. And the parents want to bring them in. And obviously there's another challenge with these, that there's an age appropriateness. At 14, there's things that the parents shouldn't allow, that they probably could and should allow at 18 or 17. So it's kind of hard to address those all together. But I think the universal thing we want to do is maintain those relationships, maintain those connections, and to model how it's possible for people with different faith commitments or different moral values to be able to maintain that relationship across that. And that is what I think North Star is uniquely positioned to do, to say, look, just because you want to hold true to the doctrines of the church, that doesn't mean you have to give up your relationship with your child, or you can't support them and love them, and vice versa. You child, you can still be yourself and be open and honest and have these conversations about what your goals are that may not align with what your parents' goals are, and how you have those conversations so that it isn't just this a really angry, bitter conversation, but it actually can lead to more love and acceptance.
Yeah.
What if I'm thinking of going to North Star, I'm a listener, and I'm not keeping church teachings? I'm same-sex dating. Should I go to North Star? And would that be a good spot for me? Or if I feel like, ultimately my path is a same-sex marriage, should I go to North Star? Would that be helpful for me? How would you answer that question?
It's a good question. I think the short answer is we want everybody to come who wants to be there and feels like there's something of value that they could gain.
If you feel a connection to your Latter-day Saint faith and some kind of affection for it, I think you should have at least that. But otherwise, I don't know that it matters.
Yeah, no. I mean, I know an individual who is in a same-sex marriage, had left the church, and 3 years ago felt this pull to come back, and they are still married, but they're trying to find ways to marry to a man, to connect to the church and to connect to a community of people who are believers. And he's not really sure what's going to happen with his relationship in the future. Right now, he feels like that's where he needs to be, but wants to reconnect to the church, and
somebody like that,
community
absolutely.
of believers.
And so he would. Your message to somebody like that, they should feel safe coming to North Star.
They should come. Yeah. And he does come and
have to be following
has a good experience.
We would want anybody to come who wants to be there. I mean, there is sort of a foundational thing that we kind of begin with a statement of belief and commitment,
which is good,
to the church. But wherever you are in relationship to that, if there is something of value that you could find, if it's connecting to community, if it's just a kind of, because the Spirit's very powerful, and there's nothing more powerful than listening to a bunch of gay men sing hymns, right? I mean, it's just like, I mean, with these voices, and I mean, it's just the hymns. I mean, it's just so beautiful there. And so if it was just to feel closer to the Savior, to worship, and that's something that they wanted, I think anybody could go. And even outside of that, if somebody doesn't have any strong connection to individuals, but they want to learn, how do I, as a member of the church who wants to create a more Zion-like community that creates space for people in a number of different circumstances, there are a number of sessions that can help them.
I've made some dear friends, Richard, there that attend who don't have a personal connection to this issue, but they come because they learn how to love people of any kind of difference. And they love the Spirit they feel there, and they keep coming back. I think we do ask, if you're hostile or want to undermine, or if it isn't a place to meet somebody to hook up with, we ask you to respect our values and goals and direction. But otherwise, if come,
I think that's what the Savior would do and want, and anybody that can come somewhere and wants to feel the Spirit, and that's in their heart, is to connect with the Spirit and their heavenly parents and feel the influence of the Savior in their life. So I love your focus on that. I think,
and in fact, if you don't mind, Richard, just briefly, we probably need to wind up here, but Ty and I thought, as we were talking about what we talk about, that maybe we'd tell the story of Gentry last year. Were you there for that bit?
Tell me.
So Gentry came, they were one of our keynotes, and they're so talented.
I was not there.
But and we can give you the link. There's a powerful LDS Living article about this that we'll send you the link that you can give your listeners. But their pianist, who's incredibly talented, he does all their arrangements, and he has had this very, very conflicted experience with his sexuality. He has this part of his identity, but he's also got this really strong connection to the church, and he's had really powerful spiritual experiences, but he also has this powerful estrangement he felt to God and the church. And so he told a bit of his story.
I don't think he was planning on sharing.
I don't think he was either. This was very spontaneous.
But one of the songs that Gentry sings, he wrote, and it's called Just Believe. But he wrote it in the context, it was like this revelation that came to him. The words just came to him in the context of his experience with, same-sex attraction. And but he said, God, if you're giving me this, I don't want it if there's any strings attached, right? He was really angry at God when it came. But he wrote it down and they sang it. And I don't know that he had plans of actually sharing his story, but before they sang it, they turned it over to him. And there was this kind of moment of...
You could see them looking at each other like, do you want to go here or not?
But he
it's
shared
up to
his
you.
story.
Wow.
And it was so beautiful. And the Spirit was so
powerful.
strong, right?
So powerful.
That here's this song, and Gentry has a music video that says nothing about sexual and gender identity, right? It has... But his writing of the song was very much in that intersection of conflict. And the revelation that God gave to him, and sharing that, and in this spontaneous way because he felt safe to do it. I mean, that's the kind of safe place that we're trying to create,
and the healing, the connection, and the vulnerability creates a connection and healing, and melts away shame. To use your earlier
if
phrase.
You're looking for that in a context of faith. I'm very confident because we're going on how many years? 8 years? 6 years? You'll have that experience here.
Since we've done the conference?
Yeah.
14 was our first conference.
Yeah, so this is 6, 7. No, I think we're on 9. Spencer said 10 years. Next year's 10 years. I don't know.
That's the way this podcast goes. We sometimes don't know all the facts, but
we don't.
We know what we're trying to accomplish with just stories and understanding and bringing us together. So any more thoughts either of you have?
No, this has been great. I really appreciate you creating this space for us.
So listeners, as I stepped into space as an ally, I kind of skipped North Star because of some of the negative things that I'd heard that I realized are not accurate. And skip meaning I kind of went to other groups and I see the good in other groups, but it takes a while as an ally to sort of figure out all the players in the space and what everybody's you hear so much information. It's kind of back to this principle. If you want to know the best about North Star, go talk to the co-founders.
Yeah.
Or go attend North Star. Same true with any organization. So I have gravitated towards North Star in the last couple of years because I've just seen firsthand the good that North Star is accomplishing and the spirit that I felt there and the broad spectrum's a good word, but of all the different breakouts and their focus on, you can go, please tell people the website in case they don't go to the link.
NorthstarLDS.org is the website.
And the /conference, if you want to. It's right on our main page right now, but if you want to do /conference,
please
you can
check
do that
out
too.
that website. We'll link to it in the podcast. And please attend North Star. I love that you've got a virtual component if you're a listener not able to come to Utah. There's something that we've learned through COVID attending church that
Yes.
I think we're going to scale into all these other organizations, and the ability for a North Star attendee that might be closeted in a country that it's really hard to be gay, and they have a testimony of the church to be able to, or a leader that's not quite sure if he wants to show up at, or she wants to show up at North Star and doesn't quite know, but wants to learn about this space. So I think you're going to, if you came on this podcast in a few years, I think you're going to talk about that part of North Star in 2021 and how that's become a key part, even though it sounds like it's expensive, Jeff. But
and if you're listening after June, get on our website. You can download this year's,
we record everything so they can get access to it.
And we also have quarterly firesides. And thanks to COVID, we'll probably continue the tradition of live streaming, even as we're adding in more live events, which we feel spiritually, we all feel as a board and leadership that it's important to get back meeting in person. But I think we're going to try to maintain the virtual. So we try to have quarterly firesides and get together. So the conference is just one thing we do. So no matter when you're listening to this, we've probably got an event coming up for you.
It's great. And all of you that are involved with North Star in any way or have been, it's a big organization, as these two men know. It takes a lot of work that I don't probably understand to put together this conference. It's really a labor of love to help us come together as the same human family. So thank you for Jeff and Ty, and thank of all of you that are involved in North Star. Please attend, and thank you for listening to another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.